Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one's going to be for Sword Art Online Volume 25, which is Unital Ring 4. So the fourth volume of Unital Ring. So, overall, what I'd say about this volume is that we definitely made progress. We resolved a few things set up from the previous volume, and then we went back into the underworld and continued to set up more and more mysteries. In terms of the greater plot, I don't think it does like all that much, but I think it means next volume should have quite a bit to say. That's kind of where I stand on it. I'd be a little bit disappointed with the section of the book that is Unital Ring focused, but I like the build-up and setup of the underworld stuff that we got here. So, with those general thoughts out of the way, I suppose let's get into kind of what happens in this book, since I think going through it and discussing it as we kind of recap it is probably the best way to discuss this. So, interestingly, the cliffhanger from Unital Ring 3 was boss fight against the Life Harvester. The sort of flesh version of the Skull Reaper, the Floor 75 boss from SAO. It gets resolved within the first chapter, like literally 14 pages, and one of them's a visual page with an image on it. So only really like kind of 12 and a half pages to cover this entire boss fight. And in the grand scheme of the book, I sort of understand why they did this. Yes, you set up that this is a serious boss fight. Why is this happening? How's it got here? Why did it chase Argo so far across the map? It leads to a little bit of interesting explanation after the fact. In terms of what actually happens with the boss fight, it ends up being relatively simple. I'd arguably say a little bit too simple in terms of where the focus is. Basically, they're aware that, okay, if we get hit by its attacks, we are done for. That's what happened in SAO on floor 75, and it's what's going to happen here. We have to make sure to basically block or avoid every single one of its attacks. We can't take damage here in this fight. So they're kind of like, okay, we have to assume it has the same attack pattern as the Skull Reaper. Kirito asks Asuna, do you remember what it is? They do. But they're like, wait, we had the commander, we had Heathcliff doing half of the defending in that fight because he had ultimate defense, and so he could block like one of its scythes all by himself. So instead what has to happen here is that basically Kirito and Asuna have to be the main line of defense. So they basically set up that like, okay, Klein, you take a group, go that side. Egil, you take a group, go that side. You are on DPS here. You are going to damage the boss from the sides. That's how we fought it before. We will take all of the aggro in this fight basically and block its attacks. That's what we have to do. They kind of highlight the idea of like, okay, what it does is it attacks with one scythe and then the other one. It doesn't seem to ever do both at the same time until it actually does. So they quickly get across the idea of like, okay, we can't just block. We have to basically counter this with a counter strike. So the idea is that Kirito and Asuna do sort of synchronous sword skills to counter the kind of effect of the attack. We've seen this sort of done before, and that's what they do. They have to be on like 100% attention to block these attacks. That happens, it switches its attack pattern like a little bit. There's some downward attacks that they're aware, like that's an instant kill if we get hit. I think they just avoid those ones. And then pretty much they sort of just cut to like, it's working, everyone is doing good damage on the side. But then when it gets down to like the final little bit of its health bar, it switches to a different attack. And they're not sure what it is, but they kind of get a sense that it's going to do what it hasn't done the entire fight, and that's attack with both sides at the same time. So basically, the description of the book gets across the idea that, of course, it's got scythes on the front, and it usually what it does is it holds one close to itself, and then just swipes across like that, and then switches and does it the other way. So this time it's actually doing like both of them like that. So they kind of get across the idea of like, we can't block both of them at the same time, and it's not going to be enough to just block one. We have to go forward and hope that if we get close enough into it, its attack pattern by like swiping across itself like that will leave a space basically like right here where the two sides won't overlap. It ends up actually working out, so they kind of avoid it that way, and so the final bit of damage gets done. Interestingly, the NPC sort of animal characters that they have at the village do come out to help them do the last bit of damage as well. So I think like you get the patter coming out and firing on them. So that's kind of like an interesting kind of thing as well. The bashing, I think, play a role here as well. So basically just within the first chapter, they defeat the life harvester. They don't really play up all that much, you know, the drops or anything like that. They establish that like they get a lot of items, but they don't really understand too much of how like the crafting system works when it comes to how to use rare monster drops. So they're just kind of like, we have an incredible amount of like life harvester meat. Like this is going to be like food for months basically. Like there's almost so much we need to use like a lot of it right now or it'll go off. Otherwise they sort of get across the idea like maybe later on in the game we'll figure out a way to better use the other drops that we got, like eyeballs and stuff like that. Otherwise they do very much just kind of move past it. I'd say the most interesting thing about the life harvester stuff is that no one dies, no one really even gets injured, but it's an amazing, you know, teamwork situation for Kirito and Asuna. Sinon has a discussion afterward. No, sorry, it's Argo and Kirito who have the discussion afterwards of like, wait. What was going on here? Where did the insect-eyed players come from? Why were you chased by this boss all the way here? And they just established the idea that if you were to look at the overall map, there are these basically like basins on the map, like parts of the landscape. And effectively they are points of interest. Every one you go into either has a village in it, a boss, or something like that. They happen to disturb a boss in one of them, and it happened to have aggressive, you know, chasing mechanics related to it. So that's how they ran so far. And it gets across the idea that Argo had met up with Eagle's wife because of her like investigating, and so she kind of was on the other side of the map, and that's how the two kind of player bases ended up kind of meeting up here. But through this, they begin to get a better sense for what Unital Ring is overall. That it is a ring, and the reason it's a ring is that they begin to figure out that, oh yeah, the way it works is sort of that almost like each game is almost given like a wedge, like a spoke on a wheel. So every game is the same distance away from the ultimate goal that they were asked to go to. You know, what was it, the place where the light is or something like that in the center of the map. That's what gets sort of revealed here. Everyone starts on the outside and you have to get towards the middle. So this is actually an instance of, they established that ALO and GGO were like wedges that were basically right next to each other. So that's how Sinon kind of met up with the group. But the insect-eyed stuff was a little bit further away, and so they came down. And you get the idea that, okay, that's what's actually going on here. That was a nice little bit of world building there. Still doesn't explain to us too much about what the ultimate goal of all of this is, other than that, of course, all the games are now basically merged together, except Underworld right now, and we'll see what they do with that. So that's the first chapter. And then basically the entire rest of like the first 2/3 of the book is the setup, the actual fight, and then the aftermath of the Mutsushina incident. So, Mudasina incident. So this is obviously the whole virtual study society, the female kind of sorcerer who has the noose of the accursed thing. Kirito has this. This is how she's controlling so many players, is that she has this crazy spell that she puts this black mark around their neck. And when she activates it with her staff, she basically, you know, chokes the players to force them into line. They figured out that she is going to attack Rusna Rig, the Kirito town, basically. And so we get the sort of preparation for that. There's even an instance where, like, there's a whole day beforehand, so, like, Kirito goes to school one day. But ultimately what we get here is just this idea of, like, they scout the map a little bit more. They've done some more adventurous stuff with, like, the building and crafting mechanics, and they figure out that, like, okay, for them to get from where they are to here, they have to basically come up this path. So they basically know the rough way that they're going to arrive up. And so they set a trap. And you don't find out what this trap is until right as it's sprung. But the idea is that they're kind of getting ready for this. Kirito does end up revealing to the entire group that he does have the Noose of the Accursed situation going on. And there's a little bit of an issue of, like, you know, hey, Kirito, stop doing stuff on your own. You need to tell us this stuff. They're very worried about him. They kind of want to drop everything and try and find a way to kind of fix it. But he does explain, and, you know, it gets through to them all that this is a high level thing. I don't think we're going to figure it out in like half a day. So that's that. In the middle of all the school stuff happening as like the setup for this, we do get a quick aside with Asuna, where just as she's about to head to the sort of in IRL meeting about the kind of strategy, Shikimi Kimura comes up to her and is like, hey, do you want to have lunch together? And Asuna, of course, can't, and she can't invite her to the strategy meeting because they don't know who she is. It's not that Asuna is like super suspicious, it's just that, like, hey, we've got some important stuff to do here, this is not the right timing. But before she can sort of say anything, her slight hesitation, Shikimi Kimura is just kind of like, okay, you're busy, how about we meet up tomorrow and have lunch? And they sort of agree to that. Once again, Asuna gets across the idea that she feels a little weird around Shikimi Kimura. Partly because I suppose she kind of figures that, like, if the whole SAO incident didn't happen to her, she maybe almost feels like, is that who I would have kind of turned out to be, going to like the elite girls' school and maybe acting a little bit like that. They don't linger on it too much, but Asuna just gets some slightly bad vibes from Shikimi Kimura. And it's maybe more of the setup that who is Shikimi Kimura in terms of like a player in one of the games. It feels like it's all but confirmed that it is Mudasina is Shikimi Kimura. There is also this setup that there's this person who's been diving into the underworld and causing problems. And is it the same person? Are there other people? You know, what's going on there? But either way, they log in, they prepare everything, and they spot them from a bit away, and they activate the trap. So it's basically 100 against like 20 or something like that. They do establish that the higher average level belongs to Kirito's group, but that won't be enough to make up for numbers. So they do have to thin the herd before they arrive. And basically what they've done is this section at the top of the waterfall, they've sort of like dammed it off. And so they kind of like set up this thing where they almost like redivert the river and then dam it off, so that when they break the dam, the water will rush over the pathway up the mountain. And so they activate that. Interestingly, they establish that Sinon uses one of the remaining bullets for her sniper rifle to blow it up. They had to set up like a fixed position for the gun since Sinon still isn't powerful enough to properly like equip it. So it has to be very fixed position type situation. So that ends up taking out quite a bit of the forces. I don't think they established that a lot of the players are killed, because a lot of them come back later on after the incident, but it takes them out of the fight for now, because it sort of washes them kind of like quite a bit away from the battlefield. Then it's quite quick. Like, it's not a full-on like crazy war level battle sequence, because it's very much focused on, you know, the different groups. They kind of make their way through the forest. There's a bit of an ambush set up as they spot Mudasina and go to take her out, because they figure we either have to destroy her staff or kill her. Either way, that will probably break the spell, the Noose of the Accursed. So they seemingly get the jump on them, like completely taking them by surprise with the strategy. But there's a reverse strategy here. It turns out there's basically been a body double, someone wearing kind of Mudasina's clothing, made to look like her, holding a staff that looked a lot like it, and it's just an excuse to draw everyone in and for Mudasina to catch basically all the main players in the Noose of the Accursed. So it goes wrong. Everyone now is affected by Noose of the Accursed. Mudasina is revealed to be flying in the air on a tamed bird animal. And basically, as soon as she can touch her staff to the ground, she has control over everyone on the battlefield. There's still the slight weakness of her ability where if she does that to take control of like Kirito and everyone else, she'll be doing the same to her own forces, but she will have the overall advantage of the situation. So that's what happens. There's a bit of a dramatic incident as like they have to get her out of the sky. So they're trying as hard as they can to do that. Eventually they wound the bird enough to where it's going down, and Mudasina is forced to basically jump from quite high up off. So they nearly kill her just from sort of fall damage, but she like just about sort of saves herself in all of this. And she kind of notes that like, I didn't expect to ever in this game lose more than maybe 20% of my health, but now I only have about 20% of my health. So they've done some pretty good strategy here overall. So yeah, Mudasina is in control of the situation. They don't really allow too much time for like the characters to talk all that much, other than that they establish that they set up a little bit more of who the rest of Mudasina's group is, in that she has two swordsmen who always defend her, and then her strategist is this kind of magus guy who seems to have orchestrated some of the previous attacks on Rusna Rig from the previous volumes. So they're setting up a little bit of like, okay, here's a rival party to Kirito's party reasonably well. But right as they're about to sort of kind of win, Yui comes in. One other little thing I do want to mention though is just that I think it's Argo, Yui and Kirito are discussing the effects of... It actually might just be Yui and Kirito. They're discussing the effects of the Noose of the Accursed and what it actually does. And they kind of get across the idea of like, it doesn't have any effect on your actual body. So there's no like SAO incident happening here where this ability is threatening to actually kill people by like asphyxiation or anything like that. But it's such a kind of like unusual like combat ability to, you know, in a game win by like suffocating someone, that it does have that effect because the virtual environment is so real of making you panic a little bit, so your heart rate goes up. But they sort of figure out that built into Mudasina's ability seems to be a sort of like restrictor type thing that in a way almost like prevents the heart rate from going too high, that like its effects kind of like are different depending on the person, depending on the heart rate. Because if the heart rate goes too high, people will get like the emergency systems of the atmosphere will go off, and that's not what is wanted, because she wants to basically force them to log out themselves so that their body is just left there and she can win that way. So it kind of gets across the idea that she seems to know there's some very technical aspects to her ability that I think almost imply Shikimi Kimura, because she has the connection with the Kimura company to a lot of this technology type stuff, and that's how she has this kind of crazy rare ability that it seems very, very powerful, and potentially also why she might be the one diving into the underworld, because very few people have access or know about that. So there's that situation. So, like I said, Yui actually ends up being the one to save the day. Even though she is also affected by the Noose of the Accursed. She says, because I'm a player now, it should affect me, but because of course she's not, I suppose, used to like the living effect of, you know, breathing and stuff like that, she seems to be able to break through it. There's some slight confusion on Kirito's part about why exactly this works, but he just figures that it's because she's basically an AI that's why she can kind of break through. So Yui gets her chance to shine here, coming in, using some magic, fending off Mudasina, and then using her sword skills. They established that like she's skilled, but she's definitely not a veteran sword fighter here. And they established that she has the right techniques and moves, but she doesn't have sort of like the power and weight behind her swings. So it makes it almost very easy to fight her because, you know, a mage is basically able to counter her sword abilities. So she just has to work on that sort of, you know, physical strength and putting more oomph into her swings, and she'll be much better. But because she is distracting Mudasina, this is allowing Kirito to formulate a plan. And of course, the reason that this works is because, again, Mudasina's skill is affecting her own people as well. So it very much is this just one-on-one battle that's like the only thing going on right now. Kirito manages to break out of the noose of the accursed. They never fully establish if it's just that he does something worse to himself to override the effect of noose of the accursed, or if his ability full-on counters what the noose does. But basically he has decay magic that basically creates like blobs of like disgusting goo. What he does is he does it with both hands, like basically on his throat where the noose is. And the idea is that he forms a blob like in his throat, and so I suppose forces the airway open that way. And he's suddenly able to move again because I suppose his senses are more affected by the disgusting decay magic than they are by the feeling of asphyxiation. Because they do get across that idea of like, it isn't affecting you in real life, it is just simulating the feeling that you can't breathe. So there's a slight sense that you can override it just by realizing it's not real, but it's not super effective. And so I suppose Kirito uses this to play on that a little bit more. That the sense of disgust at the disgusting decay magic allows him the opportunity to get back into the fight. So he attacks Mudasina at this point. A few other people do begin to sort of like break out, and they sort of like get these kind of last minute kind of like bursts of, I can just about walk through this type situation. But in the end, he is able to eventually cut through her staff after like 2 sword skills. And this frees everyone. And you think like, okay, this threat is over, but she actually just leaves at that point. She and the rest of her kind of like, the people who are properly loyal to her, her group, leave in like a puff of smoke. And it's just, that's it, that's the end. Because everyone else was just loyal to her because of the noose of the accursed. And they kind of realized that like, oh, it's gone. We're actually really thankful to you, Kirito, for doing this. And so it immediately takes all the tension out of the situation. And basically they go back to Rusnarig and effectively almost like form an alliance with all these players. They improve the town, they make it bigger. They get a lot of these players to now run the different kind of like shops and stuff like that. And things are actually going quite good. Rusnarig is becoming a notable town within the game. And they just get across the idea that what seemed like it was going to be a major threat has now been completely reversed. But Mudasina is still out there, and she'll come back and I guess attack again. What I found interesting about this is that they didn't play on like basically any of the actual like issues between like say Kirito's group and Mudasina, what the ideology conflict actually is here. From the previous volume, it was basically just that Mudasina had a very negative view on, I suppose, games, the player base, that SAO brought negativity basically into kind of virtual games, and she feels that Unital Ring bringing all the games together is just this kind of the negativity being brought together, and you'll see the worst of like humanity or whatever come out. And so she just has that pessimistic view on things versus Kirito and Co.'s optimistic view on the MMORPGs. So none of that really came out. They brought up what she said from the previous volume again, but other than that, nothing. And after that, they pretty much just transitioned to, like, straight after that, Kirito goes to Wrath to dive into the underworld, because again, he had the 2-hour limit from the last volume. So right as he met Oiline, again, I have no idea what the pronunciation of the Yu-Gi-Oh clone character is. It's like Eolyne. Is that it? Let me see, do they have it here? Yeah, it's Eolyne. It's definitely like line, so Oline, I'm not sure. But basically, I'm just going to say Oline for the sake of this. He was basically logged out in the middle of like a car ride with him. So he's returning now, and there's a funny thing as he jumps in. He returns literally to the same spot, but not in a car. So he just appears right in the middle of a road, and there's a bit of an incident there, but very quickly the people realized they were sort of waiting for him, so he's quickly brought to Oiline. They meet up again. They have a one-on-one conversation because Alice and Asuna are going to log in just a little bit later. So they have some like kind of cakes together and whatever. The dynamic that we get here is sort of that straight away, Oiline doesn't want to have the whole kind of pleasantries stuff going on. He wants them to just refer to each other as, you know, Oiline and Kirito. No need to do anything more than that. But he does seem very set on making it very clear. You are the Star King. You are the Star King. I know you are. Stop denying it, basically. He's not super, you know, threatening or like accusatory here. But Kirito, of course, just has no memories of this. He's probably... Eventually, Kirito becomes pretty sure that, like, okay, I guess I was the Star King, I just don't remember it. And Oiline does enough to get across that, like, okay, yeah, he's on side with me now. He believes this. But Kirito does still struggle with the idea that, like, really? I'm the one who effectively, like, forged most of the history of this world that I just don't remember, and I'm this like legendary figure. And there is a notable point where Oiline kind of says that, oh yeah, you say like all the names have been lost to history, but I am one of the few people who actually remembers those names. Star King Kirito and Star Queen Asuna. So that's sort of what confirms it to Kirito that, like, well, Asuna also being included there, I guess, makes it very clear that it was the two of us, because I guess he at least knows about like the time acceleration phase, that like that happened, just that he doesn't remember the events kind of from that time. So there's obviously this sense where he was in the underworld for a certain amount of time, he just doesn't know what he did during that time. One of the things that gets brought up here, because it is effectively like the continuation of their first meeting, is that we address his second name, Oiline's second name, or Oiline Herlens. And the reveal that we get here is that Herlens is actually Bercoli's second name. It's Bercoli Herlens. So there's this confusion of like, wait, are you related to Bercoli somehow? But he's like, no, I was adopted into the family. But it does explain to us that Bercoli / Venatio's family is the Herlens family that goes on. That's that lineage. So there is this kind of confusion of like, oh, he doesn't mention like his own actual father, his own like where he specifically came from, just that he was raised in this adopted family. He does say he's only 20, so if you treat Kirito as being 20 because of the 2 years, extra years he has because of testing the kind of Fluctlight situation stuff, he's the same age as Oiline as well. So they're doubling down on the whole idea that Oiline, Yu-Gi-Oh connection is there. But Kirito's takeaway from all of this is that, well, I guess that just about confirms you're not really connected to Yu-Gi-Oh at all. They even exchange basically their status windows and like look at each other's stats, and Kirito confirms that like your ID is not the same as Yu-Gi-Oh's. There's a funny moment where Kirito thinks his stats have gone down because he used to have like object control levels in like the 50s, but then he looks at it and is like, it's only like 20 or something. Why have I gone down? But then Orline is like, wait, you're missing something. It's small, but there is a 1 in front of all of those numbers. So you actually have like 120 in those stats. And so Kirito's like, ah, I see. And what's interesting about Orline, he actually has stats that are slightly above where Kirito was at the end of like the Alicization arc. So Orline is very, very powerful. This is why he is the Integrity Pilot Commander. So that's interesting in all of this. And this is this whole section of the book. Like, this is the final third of the book. Is just kind of this conversation. Kirito logs out, checks where kind of Alice and Asuna are going to come in. They then meet up, and they finally get down to sort of like business in terms of like, okay, what are we actually here for? What's going on here? And they effectively kind of like want stuff from each other. So what Kirito wants to accomplish is, of course, he wants to free Selka from the deep freeze. And so Orline kind of points out that, like, I'm guessing that's up on the high floors of the tower. As far as we're aware, the floors only go up to 80. We don't know how to access the floors above that. But he knows kind of stuff about kind of what's up there. But they'll figure that out later. So sort of, in a way, in exchange for that, Orline wants their help with a problem they're encountering. And that is that there's issues going on with one of the other planets, Admina, that they want to like remove themselves from the council that the Star King formed, and there's just issues going on. They established that part of the reason the Abyssal Horror incident from the end of Alicization happened was that the way they interpreted it is that Admina fed false information to them. Otherwise, they shouldn't have encountered the Abyssal Horror, so they were trying to get the pilots killed. So there's some sort of an issue going on. This is where they bring up the idea of the mysterious outsider intruder into the underworld, is probably the one orchestrating this and causing these problems. So, you know, you can sort of see where some of the stuff is beginning to kind of come into play there, which is definitely somewhat interesting. So this is a big surprise to everyone. It was like, whoa, we're going into space? Okay, I guess we are. But then there's the matter of how are we going to do this? Because them going to Admina is going to have to be basically not in like legal. It's not going to be an official kind of journey. So they can't use any of the sort of like military, you know, craft or anything like that. So Orline is like, well, there are two options. Either you can fly us there using like incarnation, like the stories I was told about you, but that seems very, very risky and not great. Or we will use the Star King's personal dragon craft, which is high up in the tower. And so they basically decide that, okay, yeah, that's going to have to be what we do. On the way up there, we basically get a few things here. That, yes, the lifts and stuff like that in the cathedral have been changed. It seems to only go up to floor 79. Kirito finds a kind of secret kind of compartment, and so they do manage to make their way up to floor 80. There is a door blocking their way, and they figure out that, oh, we need to put all 4 swords into the door to open this up. So this is both of Kirito's swords, Asuna's sword, and Alice's sword all need to go into this door to open it up. So that's a kind of notable thing. They open it up, and the kind of cliffhanger ending of the book is that they get in there and they find in deep freeze, like frozen, Selka, but also there are 2 Integrity Knights beside her. Because on the way up, Orline mentions to everyone that Alice asks, where are the dragons? There are dragon craft now, but where are the actual dragons? And so it's established that, okay, half of the dragons chose to go free. And so there is a habitat for them a bit further away. The other half chose to go into freeze, deep freeze, with their integrity knights. And so there's this kind of question about, like, okay, we understand why Selka went into deep freeze, because she ultimately wants to meet up with Alice again, and the whole time situation was a bit of an issue. But why did all the other integrity knights, or most or some of them, also go into deep freeze? That's like a kind of major question that we don't really know about, because obviously there's a massive gap of content between where Moon Cradle ended. It didn't even end its own story, and then there's all this other time since then, like generations upon generations, before we get to this point. Now, they don't confirm it, but I am pretty sure that the two integrity knights with Selka are Ronier and TS. It just feels like, especially one of them looks definitely, I think, like just like an older Ronier, and I think it makes the most sense as well that it is those two. So the question is going to be, how do we undo this? Because of course, the idea is that I don't think Kirito knew the deep freeze technique, but obviously Star King Kirito likely did. So I guess they're going to have to now investigate how to undo this to free them. And that's going to be much of the plot of the next book, which will lead to some interesting things, I'm guessing, once they are unfreezed, because of course you're going to get Selka Alice, which is an important dynamic. You get immediately a connection to the past, that this will be three characters who are familiar with events post like Moon Cradle and from closer to like the Alliation kind of like time period, who can fill us in on a few things. But then also you kind of have the whole Ronier meeting Kirito again, but she's older and like obviously has children at this point. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. And then TS meeting Oiline is probably going to be an interesting one as well, again because of the Yu-Gi-Oh connection, whatever's going on there. So this is going to be very interesting to see what actually happens. It does seem that just for right now, the Unital Ring kind of section of the story is just at a point where they can sort of go wherever they want from here. One of the last chapters on that side of the story did roughly get across the idea that, like, okay, everything is now set up and in place for us to now make our way north to the center of the map to basically do the main quest of Unital Ring. So it feels like a lot of the setup stuff is finally done. Rosnarig is now a proper city. They have a base of operations. They've dealt with the first initial conflicts. They can now start the journey. But it is interesting. There's definitely dual main plot lines going on here. There's one in Underworld, there's one in Unital Ring, and it's a nice sort of back and forth to kind of have that, because I can see Unital Ring stuff with sort of the slow build being a little bit frustrating, but now also having this more mysterious stuff connected to the end of Alliation is actually, I think, a really good way to do things. Especially, I think, in the anime, when they get around to doing this, I think this is going to work really, really well in their favor, having all of those visuals to go with things. So, yeah, I think that's everything I want to say about this volume. The only thing I'd say is just that, like, the boss fight, which was the cliffhanger from last volume, it was interesting to see it just get resolved very, very quickly. And then I did expect a little bit more to come from the big Mudasina kind of conflict, but it's clear that we're going to have more conflicts with her down the line. Who she ends up actually being in real life will be interesting to see. The mystery of Shikimi Kimura continues to kind of come up, but it does look like next volume we are going to have a couple of things happen, depending on what they do, of course, like how long it's going to take them to unfreeze Selka. And then, are we going to straight up go to a new planet, like, immediately? That will be interesting to see what's going on there, because that's a whole other conflict. And then, is there actually going to end up being a sort of connection between the Underworld and Unital Ring? They seem separate right now, but will there be some sort of a thing to try and, like, link them together in some way? Because they're almost getting across the idea that bringing everyone into the underworld is bad for the underworld, but the path for things is to bring everything together. So there seems to be a little bit of a conflict there of like keeping it a secret versus letting people in, given what happened before. They kind of bring up the idea that this intruder causing issues in the underworld is similar to what Vecta did in the Allyization arc, of just one bad egg causes so many issues. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, other little moments I might have forgotten about. The rest of the group do have a quick moment where they celebrate Asuna's birthday, because of course we've already had the sort of Kirito and Asuna moment with that. Basically what happens, it's mainly I think Silica and Lisbeth kind of open up their menus in game and just spray out all these sort of petals in front of everyone. And so it's just this giant sort of everyone saying happy birthday moment to Asuna before it's like the day before the fight with Mudasina. So there is that. They address that. I think only like 1 or 2 days passes. So Kirito's birthday is still coming up. It's going to be in like, I guess, 5-ish days, give or take. And we'll see what they do with that. But I'm guessing it's going to still be another 2-3 volumes maybe before we get there. So they're my thoughts on this volume. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this one. Other than that, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.